Hi there, I'm Russ Kane from the Native Plant Society. I'm also a member of the Native Landscape Certification Program team and a Texas Master Naturalist. I've saved one thing. I've been a 40-year gardener in Houston, which I should get a ribbon for, but don't worry about that. But I've been, probably for the past 7-8 years, been a native plant gardener. And I've learned a lot about pruning, because pruning, when we go to important steps in the process, pruning as maintenance is probably just as important as the installation of plants at the very beginning. This class normally has a demonstration that we take outside during a break, so we've decided to film it today. And the reason why I say pruning is so important is that it's our chance to remove any dead or dying vegetation. It also gives us room for new growth. It provides an environment that encourages better flowering and budding. And also then it manages growth for the size of the surroundings. So we have many good reasons why we want to prune. But there's good pruning and there's not so good pruning. We're going to cover that next. Okay, well, let's start off. The first thing we have to do is look at what equipment do we have to prune with. You know, there's a lot of different tools, and if you've worked in a workshop or in a repair shop, you know that it's always best to use the best tool, because it's probably the safest tool and the one that's going to get the job done fastest. So anyway, most of you have seen these. These are pruning shears. These are a bypass deal. They're spring loaded. Makes small diameter trimming really easy, like 1/4 inch, maybe a little bit more, but I wouldn't push it to 1/2 inch. Pruning shears. Okay, now for anything bigger, we have the big boy. Some people call these loppers. Some people call them bypass shears. And this one is particularly interesting because it gives you a lot of flexibility of how high up you can do this. Now, I've used this for limbs that are probably close to 1 inch in diameter, at least 3/4. So it's really a handy tool. Now, anything bigger than that, we're probably going to have to go to saws. And because it's just, unless you're really muscular, you're not going to do it with loppers. And I have 2 different varieties. One is basically a hand saw. You notice the rough edge here. This is the tree saw part of it. It's much coarser than you would see in a saw you might use in a shop to cut lumber. It's very handy. And then we have the bow saw. This is again for something that's a little bit bigger. And on this, I've probably gone up as much as a couple, maybe 3 inches. It's remarkably sharp, remarkably coarse. And the nice part about it is you could actually get somebody to help you go back and forth if maybe you don't have quite enough energy. Now, I'm going to pull this one out here because this is the one that is intimidating to some people. But it's a extendable hole saw. You can see it goes up about 15 feet. And I've used it at 15 feet. And it's bifunctional. We've got a saw, tree saw, that we can use just like we can the other saws. We also have a hinged lopper on this thing. So it gives us a lot of flexibility, and it gives you a good elevation, which is very nice. Now, this is a tool that is mostly misused. This is a hedger, and unless you have a hedge or a topiary, I would recommend this not to be your go-to tool, because we're going to talk about the differences between pruning methods, particularly shearing or hedging, and selective pruning, which is the mechanism or the process that we recommend. Now, before we leave tools, I want to also point out safety is a consideration. you know, if we're doing big things overhead, in particular tree limbs, this is a good investment. They're not expensive, you know, 10, 12, 15 bucks somewhere. Come in handy, put it in your garage. You know, think about it this way, about a 2 or 3 inch limb, if it just happens to fall on your head, it's going to do some damage. So it's good to have a helmet. Gloves, I'm a big fan of gloves, just because I don't like getting bit by a lot of things, and 2, I tend to get blisters really easy. So anyway, and I'm also, I don't know if you can see it down here, but I'm also wearing hard-toed boots. They're not steel, but they're some plastic fiber that's really strong, and again, if something falls on your foot, you're not going to have any broken toes. So anyway, that's kind of the gear part of the business, and you know, every hobby has to have gear. So, you know, go to your big box store, go to your hardware store, and get your selection of tools, because now we're going to start to prune. Okay, we've talked a little bit about our goals in pruning, and we've talked a little bit about the pruning equipment and the need for safety. Now, you know, the 2 basic methods, as I mentioned, you know, and the one most people know is called shearing or hedging. They're familiar with it from a row of holly or boxwood or something where they've done that, but you've also probably seen topiaries also. And this is called non-selective cutting. You're basically just cutting a front or a shape, particularly a non-natural shape for that plant. And again, the unwanted part of this is whenever you cut a branch or a stem, not where it starts or ends or at a node, it will tend to shoot out many different stems. And this is called water sprout growth. And the issue with this is, and you may have seen it on your or your neighbor's holly bush, once you've hedged it or sheared it, all this water spout growth takes place on the outside. And what in fact happens is it shades the inside of the plant. And you may have seen many holly bushes with black fungus on it because the sun can't get in there, the air can't circulate in there, and it creates a hostile environment for disease and challenges the plant. So we really don't promote that method, and if you're looking to prune particularly native plants, oftentimes you want that natural look. You don't need to make a topiary. And what we want to do here is just cut the unwanted limbs. Now, what are unwanted limbs? Well, like we said, you know, back in the beginning of the video, we want to remove dead and dying things. We want to open up, give some air circulation. We may want to trim the size so it's not, you know, imposing on people or structures or utilities. And so what we want to do now is give some examples of these methods of pruning on a bush and on a tree. Okay, now for the demonstration, we're going to look at selective pruning. And this year's a good year for selective pruning because we've had a hard freeze, and that always leaves a plethora of dead branches. And you can see here we've got a button bush, and it had a hard time. It struggled. It put out, killed a lot of its limbs, but it's got new growth, as you can see here. So it kind of needs some tender, loving care. I always like to start with what I call step 0. And step 0 is basically to take a step back and look at what you want to prune, and look what looks natural, what looks not natural, what's dead or dying or diseased, and focus on what you need to take out, not necessarily the entirety of what you may want to take out, but what you want to do in this particular effort. So step back, evaluate size, shape, health, and determine what tools you're going to need. Most everything on this plant is an inch or less, and a lot of it is closer to a quarter to a half an inch. So we can probably start with either a hand shear or my favorite tool, the loppers. And so again, I think where I'm going to start is here. We have a few dead branches. We're going to start there. We also have a few that are putting out long new branches that we may want to trim, and this is be a good example of selective pruning on a bush. So let's start here. One of the important parts about selective pruning is we want to trim the entirety of the particular branch. We don't want to start cutting in the middle of things, because again, that will give us the water spout growth. So we're going to go back to the origin of this particular stem, and I'm going to give it a go here. Obviously dead. Got one. Now we've got another one almost the same size coming out of the ground, and we have some new stuff coming out. So we're going to go back and get this. Now, as I said, there's some bigger boys here, and maybe I'll do the saw just to show you what I might do. I hope I can do this, so we're going to give it a try. Hand saw, because it's a little tight in here, the bow saw really wouldn't work very well. Ta-da! Now this guy is about an inch, maybe an inch and a quarter. So nice, not too awkward. Hand saw works quite well. Now let's go back and look at some of the live ones here. I'm particularly looking at those that maybe have a node point, like here. Because in order to shape this plant but still stay natural, we probably don't want it to crawl along the ground and become leggy. But this is a nice point to trim right where this node is. Hopefully you can see it. There's two coming out the sides, and we can cut it right there. So, again, that's the kind of thing I'm typically looking for, is we don't want to cut this in the middle. For example, if I cut this right here in the middle of this long thing, it's probably going to shoot out growth in a lot of different directions. And that's what we don't want to encourage, and why we don't hedge, because the water spout growth it actually breeds more maintenance, because with all these branches shooting out, it's going to maybe fill out too much, cut down on air circulation, and breed disease. Or it's also going to make me come out here more in another 3-4 months and have to trim it a second time or third time. So let's look and see if we can find another one here. Actually, this may be an example of where there was some water spout growth. Look at this here. As you can see, it looks like the end was cut off, and now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 different branches coming out from this one. So this would be a form of water spout growth. I've seen it worse than this, where it's put out 6 or 8 different stems, which becomes a problem. But if I were to trim this one here, say if I didn't think, say this wasn't central to where the plant was going to be, I'd go down to the bottom again and trim that whole piece off. And again, I don't want to trim a branch in the middle unless I have to, and if I have a node point where I can trim it. So that's your first example, and we're going to move on to the 3-step process of trimming a tree. Okay, we're moving on to trimming a tree, and I think I need extra tropical duty pay today, because it's going to be about 95, and we could have done this later in the week. It'd be 60, but that's okay. What we've got here, this is a what is this, Margaret? Is this a bear?
Swamp privet.
Swamp Privet.
Forestiera.
Okay. Well, it's got a whole variety of things going on here. And again, I'm going to say step one is take a few steps back and look at what we've got. And I'm going to show you something interesting. You know, we have a few straggler branches. Most of these are dead or dying, so it wouldn't be bad to lose those. We also have an intruder right here. We have poison ivy, which I didn't bring my gloves here now, so could be a problem, but I'm not going to get too close to that. But again, the fact that we're looking now, we identify potential hazards. So I'm going to trim some of these lower branches by hand using the bypass shear. But then there's a branch here that's an offender also. Remember we said we want to look at it and see if it's impacting any surrounding humans. And this branch actually goes across a path. And it makes everybody duck down and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to take this branch out as well. Now it's too big for this, but I think it's good for my either the bow saw or the small tree saw that I've got. So anyway, you know, the first step is, even before we try to remove this with a three-step process, I'm just going to say we're going to trim off some of these low-lying branches just to open things up a bit. In this case, it gives the poison ivy a little more place to go. I'm not going to get into trimming poison ivy today. Got a few more. And notice I'm not trying to get it flush with the bark, because one thing you don't want to do is damage the bark. It's okay to leave a short stump, which we call a branch collar, maybe more in tune with this big branch. But again, it's okay. You don't want to get too close, because we don't want to damage that bark layer. Got one more. Got one more here. And this is a dead one. I'm going to do that one too. And we're going to set out to remove this. Now we're going to get into the three-step process. There we go. I'm going to try both of these here. Now, step number one is we want to make a break cut. It's called a break cut because we don't want this limb to break any farther than this. Because if it does, it's probably going to tear the bark down into the trunk, and that could be damaging to the health and welfare of this nice tree. So anyway, the first thing we want to do is create a break cut, and I'm going to step over here actually. Hopefully, let's see, I'm going to get this out of my face first. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to make a cut away from the trunk, maybe about an inch or two. So I'm going to, and some people refer to this as the undercut. And the purpose of this undercut or break cut is just to keep the branch from tearing into the trunk. Bottom line. And this doesn't have to be very deep. This one here looks like it could be maybe a little deeper. It's about 1/8 of an inch now. 1/4 inch is good, maybe 3/8. Now, the next one is what I call the weight cut. It's going to take the weight of this branch off of the trunk. So now we go out maybe another couple more inches out here. I think that's far enough out where I can use my bow saw. loosening up a little more. Okay, see, it did tear a little bit, but it didn't go past the brake cut. I think we almost took out the camera on this shot. But as you can see, it was pretty long, and so what this has done now is left us with a stumpy limb. We have not torn into the bark. And now what we're going to do is try to take off this last little bit. And again, we want to leave a branch collar because again, we want that to heal by itself, and we don't want to go so far in that we're actually into the trunk. Some people like to cut these things almost flush with the trunk, but a little branch collar is good, and we're going to do that next. Yeah, this little handsaw is going to work a little better because we're a little close to this trunk. But you see, we've taken the weight off of this cut. I'm going to come in on the other side now. Let's see, where are we looking at? Well, maybe I'll stick to this side. Real close now. Got a nice clean cut. We're not into the trunk. We're about a 1/4 inch here, about, I'd say 3/4 inch here. And again, don't worry about that guy. Even though it's cut, it's open, it's exposed. Trees have a way, plants have a way of healing themselves, and this will all heal over. Will eventually come over the edge. Some people feel they have to spray this with, I've seen people spray anything from, acrylic paint to Raid. Anybody knows what Raid is still? It's a bug killer, but there's no need to do that. This is going to heal off all by itself, and then there will be a little fold to seal in the bark. Voila! We have trimmed a tree.